Bet that's safer than in the bank.
Are you just gonna sit there in your underwear?
Gee, I'm sorry. You want these too?
Jack!
I'm sorry, Janet. I didn't see a thing. I'll wait till you get dressed. Huh? Well, I was going. Ah, I'm sorry. Now I'm comfortable. Ow! Janet, you missed me.
Beg to differ, little lady.
Hello Buffy fans. This week on the Buffyverse I review episode 11 of season 2. It is Ted and special guest star John Ritter. In fact, he just plays John Ritter, right? He plays the clean cut, sexy, likeable, charismatic good guy, right? The one he played in that sitcom, whatever the name of it was. Wrong. Beg to differ, guys. In fact, he plays the Machine, as one of his work colleagues calls him, Ted, as the title character in this underrated episode. I think this one gets a bad rap. It is a Joss Whedon script. He worked on it alongside David Greenwalt. And you know what? It's not perfect, but I always have a good time with this one. So let's get into it. The setup of the episode is that Buffy, one night after coming home from the cinema with her good friends Willow and Xander, she thinks someone's broken into her house, so she goes on ahead. And of course, with this being the Buffyverse, the exact opposite has happened, because in fact what she walks in on is, gasp, another man. Or a man with his hands all over his mother. That sod, that swine, that smoothie Ted. It's Ted and Joyce snogging in Buffy's kitchen. And yeah, boy is she taken aback. Cut to the opening credits. And that's kind of the subversion, that Buffy's mum is seeing someone for the first time since she split up with Buffy's dad, and Buffy thinks that there's just something too perfect about this guy, because he does seem perfect. He even wins around Buffy's close friends Willow and Xander. Willow is impressed with his knowledge of technology and the sort of free upgrade he can give her. Xander's seduced by his nice cookies. More on that in a moment. And it all seems too perfect. He's making Joyce a very happy woman, and Buffy just can't take it, and she's suspicious. Now, of course, she is a little bit on the biased side, but at the same time, this being the Buffyverse, you just know something is going on, and you just know her Slayer senses has some credibility, and in fact that's what the setup is. And there is a dark secret lurking in this episode behind Ted. So that's why it's such great casting having John Ritter, because he's very charismatic and he's very good at playing that likeable, dependable sort of guy. But then he's really enjoying himself in this episode, essentially turning that image on its head, twisting it and playing with it, and then revealing something a lot more sinister and fun as well. He's a fun villain in this. But I think what's good about the episode initially from the start is how relatable it is. How I think a lot of people who, when they're teenagers and stuff, or kids, when their parents separate, they are very nervous about their mother or the kind of parent they're living with moving on and seeing someone else and potentially getting married in the future. It's that sort of anxiety I think a lot of us probably go through, where you can only see your dad as your dad, basically. You can't really see anyone else replacing him. So this is sort of classic Buffy, how relatable the premise is and the setup. And even though Buffy, on face value at least, seems a bit harsh on Ted and not willing to concede a point on it, then I think you still feel for her. You still you're on her side, and it sort of helps the fact that you're assuming that there is something too clean about this clown, as Buffy says at one point. So it's very good, relatable stuff, the setup of the episode. And there's actually a nice little scene quite early on with Angel in the episode where Angel shares some wisdom with Buffy.
So Mom's like, do you think Ted will like this? And this is Ted's favorite show. And Ted's teaching me computers. And Ted said the funniest thing. And I'm like, that's really great, Mom. And then she said I was being sarcastic, which I was. But I'm sorry if I don't want to talk about Ted all the time.
So you're going to talk about something else at some point?
I'm sorry. I just have so much to deal with. I don't need some new guy in my life.
No, maybe your mom does.
Well, sure, if you're going to use wisdom.
Loneliness is about the scariest thing there is.
Ah, Angel, you smug, suave bastard. You've nailed it, pal. No wonder you get girls like Buffy and I don't. Sorry, I'll focus again now. But that's a really great scene, just a little simple scene. And his logic is bang on. And I think it shows that's part of the difference. The fact that he's lived all these years, all these hundreds of years. So he does have that wisdom. And it's obviously something which Buffy is still learning at her sort of youngish age. And it's one of the advantages of her having Angel to lean on. Of course, it's sort of ironic that he's completely wrong about Ted, because Buffy is right to be wary of Ted, and there is some dark shit lurking beneath the surface there. But the sentiment is right. That's the important thing, and it's a good life lesson for Buffy. The line about, loneliness is pretty much the most scary thing, or the worst thing. That's kind of bang on, and it's also something Angel knows all too well. He probably knows it more than anyone else because of he is lurking in the darkness, and his kind of, that's part of the consequence of him being a vampire, and particularly with his past as a vampire. So I think one of the things I like about the episode is how it slowly transitioned into something a little bit more creepy, and we start seeing that come out in Ritter's performance. Now, obviously, this episode, to a certain extent, it's still kind of cheesy, and it's not full on dark, but you do start to see some more intimidating scenes with Ted. The mini golf thing is a good example of this, and it's a good example of the contrast between Buffy's friends and her mother, and what she's starting to see in Ted. So basically, she's kind of saying, there's a point where I can't remember, but like she sort of misses or something, and then he's like a stickler for rules, and he's basically saying, yeah, rules are rules. What we teach Buffy is what she takes out there with her in the world. And Joyce says, what about it, Buffy? And she's like, oh, fine, okay, then I'll just go and get my ball. And then, of course, she then tries to get away with one. She, puts the ball in the hole and thinks that she's gotten away with it and shouts out, and Ted appears behind her with the famous catchphrase, beg to differ, little lady, which is just so glorious. And this is when things turn a complete 160 really, and he starts threatening Buffy when she kind of is quite smart back to him, and he threatens to basically beat her up. And then when the Scoobies and Joyce pop back up, he turns around to like, who's for some, he says pizza or something, or cookies, or whatever they are. And just the cut back to Buffy's face is brilliant, just her sort of shocked expression as you've got Ted playing the happy sort of guy with Buffy's friends and Joyce. So it's a really good scene to show the transition into something a bit more kind of seedy. And Buffy obviously starts to dig around and finds out where Ted works, and that's where the machine thing comes up, because she talks to his co-worker like she pretends to be like an intern type thing, or someone who's temping there, and you get the reference to the machine, which of course reminds everyone of Glengarry Glen Ross, and the sort of nickname given to the Jack Lemmon character. And it's another something I picked up when I was rewatching this episode recently, is that I think there's a link to like capitalism in this episode, and kind of the sexist nature of capitalism a lot of time. And as things start to change and you get like it's revealed what exactly Ted is and what have you, then I think that also connects to that stuff. I think that there's something, sexist essentially about Ted, and the fact that he is that machine, literally a machine, as we find out later in the episode, which I think means that some of this stuff is kind of on the nose and a bit cheesy, and that's why some people like dismiss this episode. But at the same time, I do see some like good themes in there. I obviously really like Ritter's performance, and just how dark it sort of gets at times. Now, of course, the big scene in the middle is the one that really grabs people's attention, and it really divides people in terms of what happens after that. And we're talking about the scene where Buffy, in self-defense, appears to have killed Ted. Things get out of hand. There's a scene at the dinner table where she kind of, challenges him and asks him, are you going to marry my mum, sort of thing. And obviously Joyce has no idea about him maybe proposing, and he kind of tries to diffuse the situation. And Buffy's very honest. And Ted, again, I think this is a clever sort of character beat where he's trying to play sort of innocent and fair and good. He's sort of saying things like, no, Joyce, it's all right, I did ask her to be fair. And then he sort of positions it as, well, Buffy, you're going to have to get used to me being around in your mother's life, because she means a lot to me. And he's trying to play it off as sort of a human sort of thing, and being very sort of sly with his like remarks. And Buffy essentially is sent to a room and then goes out and is kind of in her own space, and that's a really nice shot as well, her on the swings and here vampires here sort of thing. And it's then when she comes back to her room and Ted's in there, and there's a confrontation, and he's basically read her diaries. And this is obviously when things turn really nasty, and he confronts her about going to his workplace. Another thing in this scene is that he mentions, what is a vampire slayer sort of thing, and if your mother finds out about this, you'll spend the best dating years of your life behind the wall of a mental institution. And I like that stuff partly because it is like this legitimate threat and this kind of abuse of power which someone or something, because we find out like Ted could sort of possess over Buffy. But which is something we see a lot in the show. I think with someone like Snyder, he really abuses his power, and that's sort of a disadvantage that Buffy has to overcome. But it's also interesting because in a later episode, in a later season, it's something which comes up again and is at the forefront of that episode, which I'll talk about when I get there. But things get out of hand, and Buffy knocks him down the stairs, and it appears as though he's dead, of course. And this is the highlight of the episode, the fallout to this, the way Sarah Michelle Gellar sells it, and the way Joyce reacts to Buffy. I think that is very, very realistic. It sort of rings true, because I think on one hand she's just shocked and mortified, and she's obviously, upset with her daughter, but at the same time there is a loyalty to her. She does sort of as much as she can do, kind of talk up for her, or at least is kind of on her side when they're at the police station, but she is mortified and doesn't want to talk to Buffy. And obviously Buffy gives that story. He says that, it was self-defense, and that he hit me, and all this stuff is really, really quite well thought out and worked out, like the police interview where she has to say that, because the police guy says, I don't think he hit you very hard, you don't. And she says, well, I don't bruise easily. So it's kind of getting into all these quite sort of meaty things. But this is, I've talked about Ritter's performance being really good in this episode. This is like a standout moment for Sarah Michelle Gellar when she goes to school the next day, and she's wearing like these overalls, and I think just the choice of clothing for the scene is really a great choice, a striking choice. But Sarah Michelle Gellar's performance, like the way she physically carries Buffy in that scene when she goes to school, and it's sort of got out at this point. Now, there's one or two holes there. I think you might question, would she, well, A, go to school, but B, would they allow her back in school after something like that? But I guess, obviously, there's the self-defense story and that sort of thing. But it certainly works in the moment, I think, the way she carries herself. And it is that thing about, you just want the earth to swallow you at that point. You just can't face anyone. It's like when she sees Giles, she initially like turns and sort of heads the other way, and then he calls after her, and obviously is like really supportive. But I think it's a really great acting from Sarah Michelle Gellar, and it just tackles this issue of what happens if Buffy kills a real human being. No matter how nasty Ted was, no matter the circumstances, the fact that it was in self-defense. But there's also, because in the pack she did actually kill a guy, and it's that evil zookeeper she killed. And again, that was self-defense, but it was sort of played as nothing. He came at her, like he backdropped, and she backdropped him into the hyenas, basically. But it's nothing like this. This is a really sort of big deal, because it's her mum's boyfriend. You've got that emotional part of it. But this scene really hits me every time. And of course, it sort of turns out to be not in a way, because we find out Ted is in fact a robot. He comes back, and we get the big climactic scene with him confronting, well, first of all, Buffy, and after he knocks her out, confronts Joyce, and that's when things start to take a turn. And it's it's really great stuff. Obviously, there's question marks over, well, what if Ted was just a human and he actually died? And is it a bit of a cop-out going this other way? Is it less interesting that he's a robot? And that's the deal. Up for debate, and it certainly would have been interesting if they'd gone in the other direction. But I do still kind of like the way it sort of plays out. And there's some great stuff in the back half of the episode with Buffy, Joyce, and Ted.
I think I could use a drink to celebrate.
We should probably be hitting the road.
Hitting the road?
You're going to love the house. It's furnished just the way you like it. I spend a lot of telling me what to do. Time decorating.
Well, then I'd probably better go pack.
I already have your clothes. They're your size. They're always your size. You left me once, but I keep bringing you back. Husband and wife is forever. Forever. Buffy, come out. I don't stand for this kind of malarkey in my house.
Uncle Teddy? This house is mine.
Buffy, how about a nice game of Parcheesi?
Christine Sutherland nails it in that scene, and yes, Buffy kicks some major Ted ass. I absolutely love it. Great sort of conclusion, and mother and daughter come together at the end. Buffy has to tell a little white lie. I dig her line about he's on the scrap heap of life, because he literally is. And they end up Thelma and Louise in it, which is, as Buffy says, good call. So it's a really nice mother-daughter episode, the way they come together at the end. Now, another fun little detail is how the Scoobies, the other Scoobies, Willow and Xander, along with Cordelia, actually, as she continues her kind of getting closer to being a fully fledged member, they investigate Ted's past. They find out he's been like sort of poisoning their minds literally with cookies, which is a little on the cheesy side. But they find his sort of house, and they find his ex-wife's at one point. But because it's network TV, we don't actually see that. We see Xander look in the closet, and then it's like, uh-oh, let's get out of here. What's in there? He's us, his ex-wives. And we sort of see what his place looks like, and it looks like this sort of like weird psycho's apartment from the 60s, and that's kind of perfect because this has a psycho sort of feel to it. There is something a little uneasy, a little twisted, and I do actually like the scene where Xander finds his dead ex-wives in the cupboard, so that they get the evidence they need. And there's a fun little gag at the end about how Willow has kept some of the robot parts, because of course she's tempted to do that, and Buffy's like, oh, Willow, you're supposed to use your powers for good. So that's a fun little gag. And there's a nice sort of cap off at the end where they actually catch Jenny and Giles reuniting in the library. They have a little kiss. And that's a nice bookend because, of course, it started off with Buffy catching Ted and his mother kissing. And she's like, what is it with adults now? And Cordy and Xander have a little giggle. But another good thing about the episode, which I think is a testament to the fact that it is a Joss Whedon episode largely, is that we do get little things that connect to the ongoing plot. Even though it feels mostly like a standalone story, you do get links to what's been going on in the season, like the opening scene with the Scoobies, them mentioning Spike and Drew and how it's been quiet recently. And I like the fact that Spike and Drew was in the last episode, and for the time being at least, the threat seems kind of nullified, but they still mention it. They still mention that it's a thing, and that the Scoobies are kind of glad they're not around at the moment, but they're still concerned that one day they could come back, sort of thing. So that's good stuff. I like the stuff with Jenny and Giles. It's sort of further selling like the tension in their relationship, but them being brought back together. And also Cordelia and Xander, who of course shared their first kiss in the previous episode, and we get some more of that, and Cordy getting really paranoid when Xander says nice outfit in front of his friends, and they sort of argue over it. It's like, no, they're gonna know something's up. You complimenting me like that, and then they argue over who should be more embarrassed, and they just decide to go to the eraser room or whatever it is and make out. So some fun stuff with Xander and Cordy as well. It's a really solid episode with some cheesy moments maybe, and obviously it could have went in a different direction with the term with Ted in the middle, but it's an episode I always enjoy. A standout performance from John Ritter as well. So I'm going to give it 7 out of 10. Very solid stuff. And as far as where it's going to go on the list, the big Buffy list, every episode ranks, it's going pretty high actually. I'm going to put it in at number 10, and that is just above the Pack and just below Angel. So there you have it. Solid placement. It goes in at number 10. Be interested. I don't think it will stick in the top 10 very long, because we've got some really great episodes coming up in this season. We're now getting close to this show really hitting its sort of stride and hitting its sort of top form. There's some great stuff to come in season 2. So, but people who knock this episode and think it's bad, I've just got one thing to say to them.
Beg to differ, little lady.
Beg to differ. Thanks for listening, guys. See you again next time. Goodbye.